Hello, good morning, and you are welcome to the Startup Dialogue, an initiative by the Enterprises Bureau, uh, an SME organization or a startup organization that aims at providing data and research analysis to startup companies and then also SMEs in the country. So, this discussion today is focusing on what the economy mean to startup businesses and also SMEs under an IMF control program or an IMF controlled economy. We have here Yao Lati from Deloitte. I mean, Yao has been the part of Deloitte's team working on so many initiatives for both businesses and corporate or government institutions. Yao Lati is the head of advisory at Deloitte. Welcome again to Startup Dialogue. Good morning, Yao.
Good morning, and thank you very much. I hope I'm audible enough.
Yes, you are very audible. So
Thank
this
you.
morning, we have always been saying that, Ghana is going back to the IMF, Ghana is going back to the IMF. This will be our 17th time that we are going back to the IMF. Yes, indeed, Ghana is part of the IMF. I mean, since 1960, we joined it's like a community. We pay our debts, we pay our dues, and all that we are supposed to pay as members. So we have been part of the IMF. But being under an IMF program is totally a different thing. I mean, so we want to have, a snapshot of what this will mean to startup businesses. We want to see what this program will hold for SMEs, the IMF controlling our economy or having the control of our economy in a way. What would the business environment be for SMEs? What would the business environment be for startups? So that if they are looking for contracts, especially from government agencies, what should the approach be and all that? So I would like to take your few remarks before we go into the details of the whole conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Eben. I think you're right. We've been to the IMF on so many occasions, and if we get to sign on to a program, if and when we get to sign on to a program that has been proposed as we speak, it will be the 17th time. And in all of these, we went there for different purposes. So there are some that we went for a structural change, a structural adjustment. There were some that we went there for a bailout. And there were instances where we went there for some form of extended credit facility or extended credit support. So the need at the time determines what type of program you sign on to. So essentially, the IMF has been a friend, and just for the benefit of those who are listening to us, those who are members of cooperative unions or credit unions and so on and so forth, as members, you contribute. And when you make a contribution and one person is in trouble or one person is in need, we use some of the contribution to support the person. It's the same principle that the IMF operates on, that members of the IMF go there for support when they are in need or particularly when you are in crisis. We've had tiger economies, major economies like Argentina, South Africa, Russia, United States of America, and UK have been to the IMF and have signed on to IMF programs in time past for various reasons. And so, if you look at what's happening in the global economy now, you know that subsequent to the Russia-Ukraine war, you have some countries, even Ukraine itself, may be some form of program. And so you are not immune from an IMF program. That's a fact that we need to establish. But the thing is, you don't have to be in a situation where you are almost always going to the IMF. Otherwise, then you are not being independent enough. The idea is to help you support in the short term and be independent and run your own economy without conditionalities from the IMF. And I think that's something that as a country, we need to have at the back of our minds, that IMF is just a first aid. And we should not always be going for first aid. We should wean ourselves off IMF and other international or multilateral agencies of these going back and forth every now and then when we are in crisis.
So, like you did indicated, yes, IMF are our friends and all that. But one may ask, so why is it that when your friend wants to lend you something or money, he will have to put some restrictions on you, or uh, he may want to control you. He or she may want to control you. Why should that be so when we are friends? Like you and I, we are friends. So if I'm in trouble, hi Yao, Charlie, can you just give me some mumbo or some coins? Why should you put restrictions on me that, hey, don't go here, don't go there? Why is that so?
Yeah, so I think in this context, it's a particular kind of friendship, not the kind of friendship you have with your mates, your workmates, your colleagues and friends and business associates. It's a cooperative union or a cooperative association, which has got certain terms. So, like I said, those who are members of cooperative, there are cooperative unions in churches, in workplaces, and all. There are conditions for being a member of the cooperative union, some of the benefits you get. So, the same thing, IMF has got this association, and there are conditions for you to access a credit. If we allow it to be more of a friendship and a friends and family thing, the IMF fund will collapse, and then go to your point, nobody will get money. So they have to ensure that the money they are advancing to you, you are in a position to pay back, and also the money you are advancing to you, they are not pouring water in a basket. They are pouring water in a bucket that has got some protection. So in the first place, the holes that caused you to get to where you are have all been blocked, or some of the problems that you had that put you in a situation that you found yourself are going to be solved with a program that you are signing on to. Otherwise, then they obviously will not give you the money, because then they are just going to pour water down the drain.
So let's look at how companies, not necessarily startups, but companies or the business environment has been able to maneuver or overcome an IMF program. During the days when we're going, after an IMF program, what becomes of companies in Ghana? Not only SMEs or startups, but big giants. What becomes of them?
Okay, so I think that will take me to the presentation. So if you don't mind, I'll go through the presentation, and
That's
then
right.
afterwards we can have some question time. Yeah,
Yes.
so the presentation summarizes a lot of the things that we've just discussed, but we'll go through it in detail. So the global economic challenges have been exacerbated or heightened by a number of factors. So the first one being the Russia and Ukraine war. Prior to that, we had the COVID. So if you look at COVID, it really started some problems. So at the bottom of my slide, I've mentioned COVID. So COVID is at the bottom, and it caused trade disruptions. So SMEs that were importing to sell, or those that were relying on some raw materials for their manufacturing to manufacture their products, has some challenges because you are not getting, or you are not able to import. So disruption in global supply chain, decline in tourism-based revenues. So those who are into hotels and restaurants. So hotels and restaurants subsector of the industry sector really was affected significantly by this development. Then we have increased health expenditure. On the flip side, those who are into healthcare support and others, SMEs who operate in that sector, has spiked in revenue. So they benefited from that. On the other hand, those who had to spend on health also spent a lot more on health, because you had to buy COVID sanitizers, gloves, and things that ordinarily you would not have at your premises. So these are the things that started the problem. And then subsequently, we had it aggravated by the Russia and Ukraine war. So Russia and Ukraine war was at a bad time, because it was a time that we were all expecting to have some reprieve and then recover from the COVID. And then there was a decision to go aggressively on Ukraine by Russia. And that actually caused two significant problems, which were already existing during the COVID period. So the first one was fiscal distress. So you realize that the economy and various finance ministers were crying that they didn't have access to credit and all of that before or during the COVID period. And then now Russia and Ukraine war came, and then the distress has even worsened. And then the second one being slowdown of investment and remittances. Previously, FDI, so we call foreign direct investment, were that high. Now, people are just trying to assess their options, because you can't just be taking money from the European market and then be bringing it to Africa. You are not really sure if at some point this war will escalate into a third world war or some form of a global war, which will restrict your movement. And then some of the investments you've made outside your continent, you may not even have access to them, because when there's a world war, there is a total misalignment of things. So investors are trying to adopt a wait and see attitude, and that's where you find ourselves. Now, particularly for the Russia-Ukraine war, they have caused these things. First, food crisis. Russia and Ukraine together supplies over 40 to 50% of the grains in Africa. And I think it is something that we should just sit all the African leaders down and say, look, if you don't change this thing, it's such a big shame. Ukraine alone is just about 2% of the entire African continent. And yet, if Russia and Ukraine alone feed half of us, then what are the African leaders doing? I mean, we are sitting down waiting for a country that's just 2% of us to feed all of us. That is so wrong. But that's a thing that has been caused here, the food crisis, and then we have increased fuel and energy prices because obviously there is oil and gas at stake with Russia involved. Then there's hyperinflation. Inflation, we used to talk about single digits. Today, we are projecting our inflation in Ghana to end at 28%, almost 30%. That is really horrible, like 3 times what we have been projecting over the last 3 or 4 years in our budget. Then increased interest rates. Now, treasury bill rates are in 20s and beyond. So that means that anybody who is lending to you, if the person is not putting the money in a treasury bill, the person should be asking 30% and more. Because why should he not put in treasury bill and give the money to you? Then the person should have an incentive to give to you. So decrease aggregate demand. You go to market and you say for the SMEs, they'll say people are not buying our product, people are not buying the thing because there is no money really. The economy is heightened or has been heightened by some of these problems. The money that people would have ordinarily spent on other things, they are spending more on fuel, they are spending more on food, and they are spending more on other basic things. And so, if that's the case, they will spend less on cosmetics, they will spend less on luxury, and so on and so forth. Now, the challenges in Ghana, particularly in Ghana, what are we seeing? So, food inflation is about 30.7%. That is very, very worrisome. I mean, if you have food inflation as high as 30%, then that's something that people take every day. If you have non-food inflation also increasing, that is also another worrying trend. The good thing is that food inflation is something that you can control. But if non-food inflation is also increasing, then it becomes a worrying trend. In fact, at some point in Ghana's Statistical Service report, non-food inflation increased higher than food inflation. And that for me is a worrying trend because food inflation can be controlled by seasonalities. So I'll give you a very good example. When we have mangoes in season, you buy mango for 50 pesos, 1 cedi and all. When they're out of season, you buy them for 5 cedis. So when the food is in season, when you have a lot of corn and others, the price can be controlled. But non-food inflation is something that you cannot control by season. What's the season for cement? What's the season for iron rods? There's no season for it. So if non-food inflation, prices of materials, building materials, utilities, and others are going up, then it's a cause for concern because it will take a long time, if not to even come down. So they will not come down. But food inflation can come down. So that's the worrying trend that non-food inflation is also increasing as high as food inflation. Then we have fuel petrol pump price at 11.3%, 35%. At the beginning of the year, we were somewhere around 6, and someone projected that we will end the year at 7 Ghana cedis per liter. Today we are 11.35%.
So projected 8.
Yes, so we are ending to end the year at about 8, and people did not even believe that it will happen. Today we are at 11, so the guy's projection is just thrown overboard. T-bill rate 26%, and when you have T-bill rate at 26%, you will be excited because you are an investor and you put money in T-bill. But if you are someone who is relying on lending, you should be worried because there's no way you can lend from the bank at less than this rate. Then that's how we explain the T-bill rate. And so we have GDP deficit about 5.7%. We do know that it's likely to be higher than this, but if you're able to achieve a deficit of 5.6%, I think it's not a bad thing. And then unemployment at 5.3%. This unemployment figure, I met some guys from South Africa and they were laughing or questioning it because those informal employment are just about 20%. There's another 60% or 65% of people who are in some form of self-employment. So when we go to people's household and we say, okay, are you employed? Say, no, I don't have a job that I attend. But what do you do on a normal basis? Okay, I bake, I do decoration for people on their wedding day. The person is in some form of employment. But the person may have a degree, the person has a master's degree, the person is not using that, the person is doing something else unrelated to what the person has studied. So all of those are classified as employed. So this unemployment rate is, in my view, understated to some extent, but that's what we have. And currency depreciation. So currency has depreciated by roughly 20% and over. That's a worrying trend, because on the other side, on the fiscal side, we are going to spend more paying our foreign debt, because they are all denominated in dollars. So if government is earning revenue in Ghana cedis, we will have to spend more Ghana cedis to pay our dollar debt.
So yeah, before you come to the effect on the SMEs, let me take you back to the challenges, especially with the food prices and all that.
Yes.
So the question is, having enumerated all this, the money that the IMF is going to give us, I mean, is the money going to go into the pockets of these people, or these SMEs or startups, or even we the citizens, so that we say, okay, because we've had these challenges, we can use this money to cushion ourselves?
Yeah, so we go to the IMF section in particular, but I think the point is IMF will not give you money to put in your pocket. And even in Ghana, or walk to any bank and you say you want money to put in your pocket, nobody will do that. You have to have a reason for securing the money. If you have something that you can put as collateral and the money can be given to you for your personal use, yeah, fine. Because they know that if you give money for personal use or for the person to put in the pocket, the likelihood that the person will pay is very low. The money should be directed at some productive sectors of the economy or some productive ventures to be able to convince the IMF that you pay back. And I think that's something that you should be mindful of. So as a government, what we can do is to strategically have some programs for SMEs. And those programs will be funded not only by the IMF, but other development partners. So we had that during the COVID period, where the Ghana Enterprise Agency had a COVID fund of about 600 million Ghana cedis or so. And so many other institutions put money in that fund where we supported SMEs. So if government will strategically do something like that, we are going to benefit a lot.
But do you think it should be aligned with an IMF program, such that they will say, okay, if IMF is giving us $3 billion, $1 billion of it should be for SME fund or startup fund? Is it something like that?
It will be a laudable policy. It will be a laudable policy, but it depends on government priorities. So it depends on what government is considering as a priority.
How sustainable would that fund be? Because an IMF program is just a short-term measure.
So, like I said to you, IMF is more like people who provide first aid and short-term support. Your long-term plan should be driven by you. And there is no fund or Bretton Woods institution that's supposed to help you run your economy to perpetuity. You, as a people, should run your own business. So when you are in trouble, we can't help you. But like you said, you leave the hospital, the doctor expects you to eat the right food, protect yourself, don't jump where you are not supposed to jump, so that you don't return to the hospital. And that's what the IMF is. It's just look at it as a hospital, that you only go there to heal. After you've healed, you are supposed to protect yourself and take the right measures. So the IMF is not going to give fund and say ensure that you are giving to SME for the next 10 years, and they will have a referee or an officer here monitoring that you are giving to. No, they are not going to do that. You yourself, which is why everything rests on the government, that you yourself have to have a program, which is why government has outlined what we call the enhanced domestic program or enhanced domestic whatever program they have. So that enhanced domestic program should have an SME component. If it doesn't have an SME component, then I know there are some associations here who can drive that, who can drum it into the years of government and say, look, can you include us? I know AGI and others are all making advocacy every now and then and ensuring that some of these things are factored into government programs.
So now can we go into the effect?
The SMEs in particular, I mean, all that we are talking about affects all of us. Those of us who are in the private sector, those of us in the public sector, those who are working, those who are not working, and so on and so forth. For those who have their small businesses as SMEs listening to us and so on and so, what is the effect? There's contraction in aggregate demand. So you go to market and you hear people are not buying things. People are not buying, and when you think your wares there, people don't buy because there's contraction in aggregate demand. So generally, there is a drop in demand for goods and services. If today is a holiday, if I have to leave the house, I know where strategically to live. On previously, you just move your car, you are moving around. You go to cycle, and then you forget that, oh, you were supposed to do something in Accra, and then after you've gotten back home, you drive back to cycle again. These days, you plan it. You just go on trip once, and then you are back. So people have planned their movement. People have planned their purchases. So there are things that people don't just buy because things are hard. And so this contraction in aggregate demand will affect other things, and including the things that you sell, or the businesses that you do, or the services that you provide. So use of hotels, tourism, people visiting certain areas, having entertainment, visiting your restaurant and all will go down. People will buy food and go and cook at home rather than just visit the restaurant or buy the fast food, and so on and so forth. And then tighten access to financing. Now, interest rate that you were paying at 18%, 20%, 22%, 25%, now we'll be talking about 36%, 37%, and even 40%. That makes it very difficult for you to assess, because you are not ready to sign on to that interest rate. And even at that interest rate, the bank that's giving the money to you is taking a risk. He assumes that you are making profit more than 30% to be able to pay interest of 30%. If that business is not making profit more than 30%, then that company cannot pay the interest. So they will assess you, look at your profit, and it's not that they want to give you the money, but they know that it will be difficult for you to pay. So they will limit the credit. So if you ask for 1 million Ghana cedis, they will give you 500,000 Ghana cedis. And they reduce the risk that in the event that you don't pay the 500,000 Ghana cedis, the exposure is only 500,000, not the 1 million. Then increased cost of input. So particularly those who are in agribusiness. So cost of materials, fertilizers, agriculture inputs, and so on and so forth has increased significantly. And so all these raw materials that you use, even the raw materials, if they're in Ghana and you have to ship them from central region, northern region, and all, moving them from one place to another, given the cost of fuel, these inputs will also increase. So increased cost of input, whatever you use in your business, whatever materials you use, your consumables, they will all go up. And then increased taxes. And IMF program, I'll come to that, will force government to raise taxes, because the problem we had in the past is that our taxes are not enough to
Interestingly,
make. Yes. So we have not made enough tax. Yeah.
before you continue on that, I know many people will be asking that. So something like e-levy, the kind of fight we had, I mean, literally, before the approval of e-levy and all that. Under an IMF program, would the e-levy be abolished? That would be...
Yeah, so I think I've said in the past that one thing the IMF will be clapping for us is the fact that we have managed to convert all Ghana cards into tax identification numbers. And IMF programs the world over are pushing for us to digitize our revenue collection. And Ghana has been remarkable in doing that. What we need to do is now convert that digitization into actual revenue mobilization. So you don't rely on only e-levy. There are so many things that you can identify people with and tax them for. Their property, their businesses, so many other things. So if e-levy has failed, what were the other revenue measures that you... I mind you, I mean, I have explained this in the past, and I think e-levy was overflogged. Why? Because government total revenue for 2022 per the budget that was presented last year was 100 billion. Out of the 100 billion, you were expecting to get 77 billion from taxes. Out of the 77 billion, only 7 billion or even 6 billion was coming from e-levy. So take e-levy out of that bucket. You have 70 billion that you were supposed to raise from other sources. And so if you are canceling or abolishing road tolls and others, I'm just asking, where are you going to get that 70 billion from? So you go to an exam room, you have 100%. For some reason, you cannot answer one question, that's 7%. So you have to raise the 93%. You have to find the 93% and pass. And so for us, we just spend wasted time on e-levy that was supposed to give us just 6 billion Ghana cedis. And that was so wrong. We have other things that we had outlined in the budget that I wanted to see a lot of movement on. I didn't see a lot of emphasis on those. revenue sources.
But don't you also think that we are in a haste to see this e-levy become successful? And that's how come we rushed to the IMF. Because if you remember, the finance ministers by then, the deputy finance ministers, especially John Kuma, was telling us that if we don't pass e-levy, we may have to run to the IMF. And they don't want their government, they don't want us to go to the IMF. That's why they are struggling. They did all they could to ensure that e-levy has been passed.
Yeah, so I'm not sure for the numbers he gave, I'm not sure what else he was expecting from e-levy apart from the numbers they gave us in the budget. So if you're expecting 6 billion from e-levy and yet you had projected revenue of 100 billion, you are expecting another 94 billion from other sources. So if you say that 6 billion does not come, you have to run to IMF. Then what are you telling yourself? That without e-levy, we are not going to get properties. Without e-levy, we are not going to get fees and charges from the local authorities. Without e-levy, no, there were other things that we could have gotten money from. And so really, like I said, it was overflowed. We relied so much, we wasted too much energy on, and then failed to get revenue from the other sources.
Okay. So the question is now, with this, the IMF will be clapping for us, yes, and they will also be expecting us to raise more revenue domestically.
Yes.
Should businesses be worried? Should startups be worried that there's going to be some imposition of taxes, if not new, at least an enhancement of the old taxes on their operations?
Good. So I'll go into the details of that. You're looking at how previous IMFs have gone. Right? So I'll go into the details of the tax component. Yes. So we can finish off with this, and I'll show you exactly when IMF programs are signed on, how they expect you to mobilize revenue and its effect on SMEs. So impact of the return to IMF. Yes. So that's the first point that I have here. Tax administration. So you see that adopt a tax regime for small businesses and tax exemption for SMEs. So they are saying that they should adopt a tax regime for SMEs and tax exemption for SMEs. This was 2015 when we went to the IMF. It was in the program that we should adopt a tax regime for SMEs and tax exemption. So all those who are on the tax exemption, we were supposed to review that. And then we should have a special tax regime for SMEs, because the idea was that a lot of SMEs were not being taxed. So the IMF said, make sure you tax SMEs. So be prepared for that. The second one is energy sector. Increase tariffs to reflect the cost of generating power. The truth is, the tariffs you are paying does not reflect the cost of generating power. And that's the gospel truth. Regardless of how you see the power and how reliable the power is and so on and so forth, we are paying less than what we are supposed to pay. And so IMF coming on board will tell you, take that hard decision. Every quarter, just like we see in the fuel sector, because they are operated by BDCs, private sector operators, they ensure that the fuel prices are going up before they bring the crude. In the electricity sector, we are depressing it, or we have been suppressing it, because, of course, a lot of it is controlled by government. But ideally, the tariffs should have also been going up every now and then. When things go up, when even the city depreciates, our electricity cost should have gone up. But we don't do that, maybe for some other reason. But with IMF coming on board, we would have to get that done. Then public sector reforms and privatization. So you're going to see a lot of reforms in the private sector, where some institutions are going to be moved around, some institutions are going to be privatized. And we've had some of the privatization going on. There will be a lot more of those privatizations. And that's a fact. And we should prepare for that. There will be hiring freeze. So employment in certain sectors that are overstaffed will be frozen for the next 2-3 years, because obviously, if people are overstaffed, why do you still continue to employ people there? What are the people you are employing going to do?
But on that overstaffed point, I think the deputy minister, again, Dr. John Kuma, it indicated that the IMF itself knows that they don't have good name, in quotes, on the African continent and even globally. So they may not put on restrictions that will kind of put the Ghanaian into more difficult times. So he was assuring, he spoke to us a few weeks ago that there won't be any employment freeze. I don't know whether we are supposed to take his words or not.
Okay, good point. So I'm here to tell you that the last 2 programs that we signed on, the IMF programs, the IMF did not impose on us. We actually wrote that we are going to freeze hiring.
Okay.
So I'm waiting for the minister to tell me that he has not written or submitted any paper that says that he's going to freeze hiring in any sector. If that's the case, then that's fine. All of those programs, we actually propose that we're going to do it. The issue is, let me show you how the IMF works. So IMF has the money for you, and the money he will tell you, this is the money you have, or there's a cap. So you are going to school, your dad gives you 200 Ghana cedi, just spend. You can use all the money to buy sardine, fine, but make sure that when you are hungry, that sardine will get you gari, it will get you shito, it will get you something. So you yourself will have to decide that if that's the case, then I'll reduce the number of sardines and then do other things. So we ourselves will have to rationalize labor and not necessarily freeze on hiring. We have to rationalize labor. And so the cap is there. You will come back and realize that no, if I continue the way I'm continuing, I can't survive. And that brings me to the next point where we talk about expenditure cuts. The size of government is too big. We have to cut it. And so we ourselves, and even the government started before this IMF conversation started, we started cutting our expenditure. So if in case the IMF had come and had asked us to cut expenditure, they would have gotten a bad name, like we always put to them.
But do you think government will do that? Because I know civil society organizations here in Ghana domestically have been asking government to cut down budget, cut down its expenditure, cut down its size.
I made a point that it's easier to do that. It's easier to do that now because you have someone else to blame.
Wow. So we can blame it on the IMF.
It makes it easier. And I think that's why I'm telling you that previously, the hiring freeze, the IMF did not impose it on us. We actually submitted.
Okay.
But it was easier to say that because we have an IMF program, we are not hiring. Because for a politician, that is the way to send a message. So
but should that be the case? Should that be the case when you have food and you are hungry, and you know that you are hungry, you are waiting for someone to come and tell you that eat before you eat?
Yeah, you have to wear the political hat to understand it. That's what they tell me. If you are not wearing a political hat, you can say it the way, but when you are wearing a political hat, even sign on to IMF program has been a battle until this point. Yes. So it's not as easy as that. It's just the way we operate in this country and particularly on this continent. We're not facing the fact or when the fact staring at us in the face and we decide to think something else. Yeah.
So on the other hand, let's go into the SMEs.
Yeah, so there is some other benefit that SMEs can take advantage of, and I think we are not only looking at the gloomy side of things. There are other benefits that will come to us or come to SME. One of them is the cost of borrowing reduces. So the cost of borrowing, as we are talking about 26%, 30% and all, over time with an IMF program, government will be borrowing at a cheaper rate. And the government is borrowing at a cheaper rate, we expect the cost of borrowing to go down.
Okay, that's the good news for SMEs and startup companies, I guess, because if cost of borrowing comes down, it means they can also go to the banks to borrow. And now with the Ghana card and all that, at least the risks will come down a bit and they can also borrow. So I think that's a good news for SMEs out there.
Good. Then the next point is improve procurement process. We'll be expecting a lot more transparency in our procurement process because one of the things that IMF program that I've seen in Zambia push for, in fact, there are something that the IMF themselves will push through, is transparency in the procurement process. So we have to push and do things like e-procurement and all. So we will avoid the age-old problem of where people who have not done any job before are awarded contracts and so on and so forth. Then we have what we call policy credibility, improve investment climate. So once there is an improved investment climate, all the foreign direct investment that have been put on hold, you may have heard that a lot of foreign investors were taking their money out of the country. Yes. When you have policy credibility, all those monies will start coming back and they'll be investing in areas that SMEs will benefit. So these are very good things that happen. And then we have economic diversification.
But how sure are we that SMEs will benefit from some of these investments? Because
the
kind of investor community we have here, when they come in, they go straight to the big giants, the big companies. I will not want to mention names, but
no, they are. So from where we sit, I mean, we as advisors to businesses, we have investors who are private equity firms who are investing in small businesses into water production, and so the SMEs themselves, they know. Some of them are even talking to investors who have gone quiet. So the investors have gone quiet because your economy is not too good. And so those who are listening to us, some of them already know this. that some of the foreign investors they are dealing with have gone quiet or have put the thing on hold. And the reason is they may not tell you, but your economic conditions are not good. So they will come back when your situation improves with the IMF program. Yeah.
Okay.
And then we have economic diversification. So previously, agriculture was the biggest contributor of our GDP. Today, that has been displaced. Services have taken our GDP
Yes.
because a lot of us have decided to work in the hotels, restaurants, media houses, and all the consultancy firms. I tell you, service sector can create employment, but the employment created by the service sector is not as big as those that will be created by industry and agriculture. So an IMF program should help us restructure the structure of our economy and put more investment in agriculture, because once you invest in agric, the guy farming, the guy supplying the farmers food, the guy who's transporting the food to Accra, the guy who's processing the food, and the guy who's exporting the food. So you can see the value chain. It's a lot. Whereas when you sit in a hotel, a restaurant, with all due respect to all those who are working in the sector, how many jobs do you create? So the guy into farming creates so many jobs directly and indirectly. Whereas those of us in the services sector, we only create for the professionals. If you are not a professional, you can't work in that sector. I think that's something that government should look at, and the IMF should really insist on, that we are expanding our these agriculture programs, industrialization programs, and so on and so forth.
But yeah, can we also have a program where we say, okay, this particular fund that is coming from the IMF, it is going solely into the agri sector, because we know that the agri sector will employ at least 60 or 70% of the people. Can that also be possible?
And that's a very good question. So I think that's something that we ourselves should do. And I don't expect us to wait for government to decide. We would have to, as associations, I see Agri Workers Union and all, they have to start making that advocacy.
You think the agribusiness associations and the agri workers unions, and could they have to do that advocacy?
In fact, because this is the time that we are writing the program. Like I said, the IMF operates like, write your questions and then let me give you some guidance whether it makes sense. So write your own program and let me guide you through to implement it. So government is doing what we call enhanced domestic program. Does the enhanced domestic program of a sort include agriculture? If it doesn't, then we should be making that advocacy that, look, we do not want a program that displaces agriculture, that is focused on the service sector, that displaces the industry sector. The industry sector has been contracting. In other words, we have been declining in growth. So we are recording negative growth in the industry sector. We should change that. And the way to do that is have some of these programs restructure our economy.
But you see, even the industry sector and the agriculture sector, they have a link. Is that not the case?
Excellent. That's a very good point. So we did a survey of some about 100 SMEs, and 100 SMEs, over 60 of them were all agri-businesses. So they are agri or agri-related businesses. So it's the same thing when you go to the industry sector, you have some agri or agro-processing. So they are all linked to agri-business. So if you improve the agriculture sector, you improve the industry sector automatically.
Well, let's look at some of the benefits as well. Like you did mention, yes, interest rates will come down, or cost of borrowing will come down, and all that. But moving forward, should we also be that hard on government to say, yes, the fund is coming, we want this, we need this, especially when we know that there are challenges with the economy?
Yeah, so I think it is for us to accept. And I think what helped, I always use the HIPIC as an example. When we signed on to HIPIC, nobody had an issue with HIPIC because it was clearly communicated. I remember the government at the time did some high-level stakeholder engagement and explained that our debt was, I remember that was when we were hearing words or three terms like OPPP, OPPP. We had those terms because people were explaining things to us. And so at the time we were signing on to HIPIC, nobody opposed it because we realized that our debt was OPPP and all those things. That's when we started hearing those terms with Safumafu in charge. Now, the question, have we educated ourselves enough about IMF program? That
you think the communication hasn't been enough? You think the communication hasn't been enough?
So if you're able to do that properly, I mean, people buy into it.
So what do you think there should be some strategic communication towards this IMF program?
Well,
When the government sign on to it, I
long
know some
overdue.
were
It's
designated.
long overdue. It's long overdue because of what has happened in the past. So that's long overdue. We should get it done, particularly when a few things have not really gone right, and then the fact that we didn't even want to go in the first place. So that communication is important.
Okay, you can go back to the slides.
Okay, so I just want to advise SMEs on some of the things they can do, and whilst we are just managing this issue. So the first one is that you don't have to panic and do not feed on negative news. A lot of the things I'm saying here, you may have heard some in the wrong way, or you've been misinformed in some way. So even the politicians themselves say it differently. And so don't feed on negative news. Engage experts and listen to the right source of information. Utilize whatever government support has, whatever government support that's available. Just take advantage of it, because it's better to have a few and manage than not having anything at all. Communicate with your stakeholders. Talk to your suppliers. Things are difficult. Talk to your customers. Talk to your lenders. Talk to your employees. Same as we manage COVID, a lot of these are going to come back. So talk to all these stakeholders. Make sure you are communicating with them properly. The same way we are accusing government of not doing A, B, C, D. In the same way, you too, if you don't do the right thing, your employees should be angry, your customers should be angry, your suppliers should be angry. So you to go and do the same thing. Make sure you are communicating with them. Make sure you are explaining things to them. Otherwise, then there will be disgruntled people in the country. So people are unhappy with government, and then employees are also unhappy with their employers. So make sure you are communicating with all the stakeholders. Then seek support from existing fund providers. So if you can get some your loans restructured or some short-term credits, please feel free to do that. And if your shareholders have got money to support you, you can rely and then get some money from them. And then those who are doing buying and selling, manage these three things: inventory, receivables, and payables. So the things, your stock that you are keeping, make sure you are not overstocking. Some people buy so many things and put in their warehouse, some of which they don't need. Just make sure you are buying things based on need. You have assessed the need and you are buying it based on it. Review your constraints, review any bottlenecks, and then manage your receivables. Make sure you have raised invoices. I've seen some companies where the people who want to pay them are asking, when can we get your invoice? You shouldn't even wait for that to happen. As soon as you deliver the service or there's an agreement, raise your invoice so that within a short time they can pay. People are going through hard times. So if you don't raise your invoice on time, they will use the money for something else.
Yeah, let me take you back on the receivables. So in these hard times when food prices are going up, I mean the price becomes unsustainable. You don't know when prices will go up and when prices will come down. You think we still shouldn't stock?
Yes, which is a very good point you have raised. So you are stocking just to make sure you are immune, you get yourself immune from escalating prices. But make sure what you are stocking are things that you can also dispose of within a period of time. Otherwise, you stock too much and then you are not able to dispose of, and it becomes a cost to you. Because after a while, the third people will come, the payables, the people who are going to take credit from, they will ask for their money. So make sure you are matching it. The time that you are expecting to receive money is shorter than the time that you're expecting to pay somebody. So if people are expected to pay you in 2 months' time, make sure you are also ready to pay someone in 3 months' time. If the person is coming for money in 2 months' time and you're giving somebody credit for 3 months, it means that by the time your people come, your creditors come, your receivables have not paid. And so that's a problem. So make sure you match that. If you don't match that properly, you just go and overstock and be doing those things. Yeah.
What about managing the payables? I'm interested in that as well. Just
Yes.
find out how we move.
So map your business critical supply to determine the priority of payment. I know other people do it to you, so you also have to do it to other people. So make sure who is the priority. One, your employees count because they are the people who do the work for you, and then the people you take supplies from. There are others that you are buying from, they are in bulk, they are bulk suppliers. So the amount of money you take from them is not too significant. It doesn't really impact their cash flows. So they are able to give you some credit. But if not, just try and manage that. Yeah, over time.
Okay, that's okay. We can move on.
So the final words, let me conclude here. So from Boris Johnson, the man who has gone through all manner of issues, and
Yes.
my
Yes.
friends, as I have come to discover myself, there are no disasters, only opportunities, and indeed opportunities for fresh disasters. So definitely, there are opportunities in the what we call disasters or the challenges that we find ourselves. But within those opportunities are things that you also have to be mindful of so that you don't fall into another trap. In the midst of challenges, you fall into various traps. And I think what we are experiencing globally is causing a lot of economies to do all manner of things. And yet they start creating problems for themselves. So the way we are managing Russia in itself is creating problem for us as a continent. So really, we have to look at these things and know how to balance it, how to manage the problems. Yeah.
Okay, so before we go, there are some few questions I would like to throw in there. But
Okay.
viewers and listeners, we are still on the Startup Dialogue, an initiative by the Enterprise Bureau. As you all know, Enterprise Bureau is in there for startup businesses, SMEs, data research, and all that. This dialogue or this discussion is to just enlighten you on what an IMF program means for your business, what an IMF program will mean for whatever you are doing, the operations you are in, the taxes that you are supposed to pay, what it might also need for what it might also means for your future operations. So we have here Yao Latte with the advisory unit, head of advisory unit at Deloitte, Ghana. Let me ask you, Yao, before you go, there's one question here from Scandov Christopher. Is it? He's asking whether there's a PDF file on this. Yes, I'm sure we'll provide a PDF file later on. But my question is coming to inflation. We having an IMF program. Are we going to see any significant impact on inflation, such that we say, okay, price of food and commodities may come down, and therefore will be cushioned in a way?
Um, so it will not necessarily happen that way. In fact, the IMF is actually in a very difficult time now. They found themselves in a much more difficult situation during COVID. And then Russia's Ukraine has also aggravated the situation. So they cannot manage the problem of the world. They can only deal with the effects. And,
Okay.
and so the effect is what we expect government to work with the IMF to mitigate. The fact that you are not getting enough of cereals, enough fertilizers, and all are not things that you can solve in a short term. No, you can't do that in a short term. It will take a bit of time. And you probably have heard in the news that the first grain left the shores of Ukraine this week. And we used to have thousands of them. So we are now counting them in one a week, once per week. I mean, that's a serious problem.
We as SMEs, do we be afraid that, okay, because the IMF is coming in, government will not give us contracts, or if not contract, at least some kind of, business, petty businesses that we may get from government, when it comes to printing of books, printing of invoices and stuff. Not only that, but other services that we may provide to government. Should we be afraid of that? Should there be that fear?
Yeah, so for those who are signed on to government programs or who are supplying to government, there are two things. So those that are driven or paid from internal generated funds, it may take a bit of time. And so government say, oh, they are using the internal generated funds, or your payment are those that are usually outlined in the budget. It may delay a little bit because monies are not flowing the way they are supposed to be flowing, and that's a fact. But there are some of you who are supplying for under programs that are externally sponsored. So they are sponsored by Danida through some ministry. They are sponsored by the World Bank through some ministry. They are sponsored by USAID through some ministry. Those ones will be paid. And so you have to distinguish the two. Just understand or know who is funding your program, and then you'll be fine.
Okay, and another question too is, so should we as an SMEs, should we target areas where we do business? Like you're saying, yes, I'll say, okay, because the IMF is coming in and internal generated fund will be a challenge. So I'll target a program, or if I'm supplying to government, should be something that is supported by either the World Bank, IMF, UNICEF, or all those development partners? Should that be the case?
No, you can't be targeting like that, especially when, let's say you are supplying under school feeding program. Then you say no, you want to supply under planting for food because planting for food is externally funded. You can't convert overnight, change all the thing that you used to feed the children, change them to cutlass and hoes. No, you can't. All you need to do is to be strategic in your dealing with government. Just make sure you are not overly exposed to government. So you have to have some discussions. Like I said before, talk to your stakeholders. Try and understand when they are likely to get the money. Ghana Buffer Stock Company had all manner of issues, and because of that, you realize that some children got hungry for a few days, and now the issue has been resolved. It's all because, like I said, we were not even engaging the stakeholders. We are not talking to the right people. And so if you're able to engage the stakeholders and say, government is expecting some money, but the money will come in September, the person can go for some short-term credits, knowing that by September he or she will be paid. In the same way, you also have to engage the stakeholders to understand what's going on.
There's another question here, which is which areas are advisable for one to invest in an IMF program? So, because government is going for an IMF program, yes, there will be some tightening and all that. What do you advise that areas that we need to invest in?
So you can't. There can be specific areas to say because IMF program only looks at fiscal challenges and creates fiscal space for government, not coming to run the economy, like I said. And that's something that we always have to emphasize. IMF is not coming in as another government. No. What government has been doing, they will continue to do. So just try and position yourself properly. All that they will expect government to do is to raise more money to make sure they are not spending on waste stuff. So if your things, the thing that you supply to government, are things that could easily be considered as waste. And I gave an example that if you supply Christmas hampers to various ministries and departments, rethink it because it's something that can easily be cut. So if you really are doing these things that are not really considered as essential, rethink those things.
Would there be a case when government will present a program to the IMF and the IMF will say, no, we are canceling this, we are introducing this? Is there a point like that? Like you did mention, yes, all the programs that the IMF we sign on to, we go with our developed agreement. Has there been a case when the IMF will say, no, we'll not go by this agreement, but we'll give you our own agreement?
No. So the IMF will not entirely reject. So they will make some suggestion. And I think, like I said to you, it's like your father giving you 200 cedis to take to school. On your way, you can buy sardines and take to school. When you get to school, you realize that you need gari. You realize that you need a sheto. You realize that you need milk. So you can't use all the money for sardines. The IMF has given you how much they can use to support your program. So you have to decide where to raise the money from the other extra money you need. And so you end up restructuring things yourself, even without the IMF telling you. So in other words, the cap that they are giving you will force you to do the right thing, to say.
Do you think SMEs should cut their budget under an IMF program?
No, I mean, it's a question of, like I said, cut your coat according to your size. Make sure you are running things in line with the general economic situation. Don't be so fixated on the IMF and what they are going to do. Just make sure the economic situation is driving your things. Yeah.
Okay, moving forward, what should be some of the areas that I think as an SME, if I have to do, like you're saying, yes, we should manage our receivables and payables and all that, our stocks and all that. Which of these areas do you think, okay, I have to buy this, I don't have to buy this, I need to get this, I don't need to get this? Can we have some specifics on that?
Oh, I think I've outlined some of the things that we just have to focus on managing our receivables, payables, and so on. And just make sure you're not stocking, overstocking, and you prioritize your expenditure, even at a personal level. Just make sure you have prioritized your expenditure. Okay.
As an SME, even though yes, government is saying there's not going to be a freeze on employment, as an SME or as a business person, am I right to freeze employment, or you think I don't have to?
No. I think this thing happened during the COVID period, and I advise a lot of companies that the lazy approach is to say you are sacking your employees. You have lost credibility in the market, and next time when you need people, they won't come. So you have to manage the situation. It goes back to the thing I said: talk to your stakeholders. During the COVID period, people stayed in employment for half of their salary, and when things stabilize, they are still working. Imagine you have sacked them. So you have to manage the situation.
But how can you still have your employers when employees when you don't have money? Like, you have a tight
Yes.
budget.
Yes.
I'm just
So
wondering.
I give you an example that there are teachers who were willing to work several months without salary because what they didn't want to just accept the fact that they have been sacked.
And you think they
And
will not come back to agitate?
the employers said, look, you can do half day, the other half day, go and find something else to do. Like I said, it's all about the communication. It happens even in marriage. It happens wherever you find yourself. Make sure you are communicating properly. You may not necessarily, you can even have people to take their leave and go and do something else. So leave of absence, 1 year, 2 years. If that's the situation, then they come back. Don't bend the bridges, whether you as an employer and employee. Don't be doing that.
Okay, thank you so much,
Yeah.
Yaolati. Before we go, I would like to give you this opportunity to speak to our SME members and startup businesses in case they may want to reach out to Deloitte for any form of business advisory or any opportunity. Kindly just use this opportunity, these few minutes that we have to speak to our SME partners.
Okay, so thank you very much. I think thanks for the opportunity. Deloitte is a global advisory firm. We are the number one global professional services firm. The other firm come to us several billions of dollars behind us. So talk about the KPMG, PwC. There are several billions of dollars behind us. So we are number one professional services firm. We offer consulting, audit, and tax advisory services. And advisory services, we do financial advisory, which is what I lead. We help preparation of business plan. We help preparation of financial models and stuff like that. And we also provide general consulting advisory services, HR consult.
Oh, you've timed it.
Have you said goodbye to them?
No, no.
So you have to end it.
Goodbye to everyone. We'll come back. We'll come back with you with another exciting discussion on this. Goodbye.